Hey, this is Simone from Lawyer Does Health, and today we're starting our series where I summarize the chapters in Outlive, The Science and Art of Longevity by Dr. Peter Attia. This is the first video, so I'm aiming to keep each video under 3 minutes. This one might be a little bit longer while I tell you why I'm doing this. As you might know from the name, I'm a lawyer. I am not a doctor. I'm not an expert in anything longevity. I'm not an expert in supplements. I'm not an expert in anything other than one thing, and that's either the law, which includes research and summaries and synthesizing. So what I've decided to do is, because I'm obsessed with this book and it's crazy dense, over 470 pages long, I'm going to be synthesizing, summarizing, and synopsizing each chapter for you. And that is my value add. I'm the Cole's Notes of health research. On top of that, you can play the video or listen to it on your daily run or your walk, or 3 months down the road when you've forgotten everything that is in this book, but you want to remember because you were like, there was something about neurodegenerative disease I really wanted to know in chapter 12. Well, I got you. So that's what I am doing here. The book stands by itself. You should read it. You should get it. You should highlight it, do all that jazz. But in the interim, feel free to listen to my summaries and get an idea of what this book can provide for you. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I'm going to be summarizing everything, obviously, over the video, but I'm actually going to include in point note form underneath the video the main takeaways from each chapter, focusing on like operations and practice guides and pretty much what you can take and what you can practically incorporate into your own life. Okay. So let's get started. The summary of Outlive. This is a book about prevention, preventing disease, preventing things like cancer, neurodegenerative disease, metabolic disorders. As I mentioned, it's 477 pages, and yet it still manages to cram a stupid amount of information into this particular book. Longevity is the study of how to live better, longer, or kind of how to stack the cards in your favor to avoid getting disease. It's not going to guarantee that you're not going to get disease, but it's going to give you all of the tools in a tool belt to make sure that you've got everything at your disposal to avoid it. Right now, our medical system is very geared in terms of reaction. So once a diagnosis hits, that's when the medical system kicks in. And this entire book is about flipping that advice onto its ear and switching it up and saying prevention is kind of where it's at. So the introduction really sets the stage for the book. It's again about prevention, why run around catching a bunch of falling eggs when you can actually stop the guy who's throwing them from throwing them in the first place. And that's really what the introduction is about. Moving on to chapter 1. Each chapter, by the way, has an amazing little quote attached to it. This one is, there comes a point where we need to stop pulling people out of the river and go upstream and find out why they're falling in, by Desmond Tutu, in case you're interested. And so chapter 1 really follows off of the introduction and explains why the book is important and why everyone kind of needs to read it. As I mentioned, our system only kicks into gear when a person is diagnosed, not before. And that's also where medical training is. So if you've ever gone to the doctor, you're usually already suffering from something. And that's because our medical system pays doctors to fix you. It doesn't pay doctors to prevent you from breaking down. And this is where he leads into the horsemen of the apocalypse. There's 4 of them. So this is probably what's going to get you, provided you don't get hit by a train or fall off a bridge. And those 4 horsemen are heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, type 2 diabetes, metabolic dysfunction. That last one is one. And once you're tagged with one of these horsemen, the medical system kicks in. So because we know that the 4 horsemen exist, Dr. Attia really goes through, well, why on earth aren't we doing more to prevent it? We know what's going to kill us. So why can't we look for our signs and our tells about what exactly is happening way before it ever happens? A great example he uses is how nothing helped reduce incidences of lung cancer more than smoking bans. That's a preventative action. So what other preventative actions can we do and enact to ensure that these 4 horsemen don't come earlier than they necessarily need to? Some takeaways from chapter 1. There's plenty of evidence-based tactics that we can do on a daily basis that delay all the horsemen, which is really good news. Also, some current tests that are currently used for the horsemen are entirely nonsensical. We'll go into that in more detail per chapter when we speak about that particular horseman. But a good example is the one where you do cholesterol panels every year. He says that's entirely useless and doesn't actually show your incidence or your chance of getting heart disease. Average and normal does not mean good and optimal or healthy. So just because you're testing on an average basis, or just because you came up with your test is, oh, you're average. Well, average isn't good. And you got to treat the horsemen not in silos. That means that everything is connected. You've got the metabolic issues that you might be suffering that lead to type 2 diabetes also make you more prone to heart disease, to cancer, and Alzheimer's, which is one of all 4 of the horsemen. So just remember that if you've got a particular affliction, chances are it could make you worse for any of those trains that are coming for you. Another thing he talks about is diets. He says diets suck. There's no particular diet that's a magic bullet. Ultimately, he calls it nutritional biochemistry. There's a whole chapter on it. But ultimately, you have to figure out a long-term eating routine that works for you, and you got to stick to that. That said, he said protein is really important. As we get older, we have to increase our protein. But again, there's a whole chapter on that. Exercise. If there is one takeaway from this entire book, it's exercise. Cardio, balance, strength training. The older you get, the more you need. If there's one thing that can delay all of these horsemen effectively, it's exercise. We'll go into more detail about that, but just if you want to take one thing away from all of these videos, it's that: exercise more. Emotional health is the last takeaway from this chapter. Then he says we're going to talk about it. There's a beautiful chapter on his emotional health and his journey through it. But emotional health ultimately leads the question to, why on earth would you want to live longer if you're not happy? So it's a valid question. And that's it. So what does this book aim to do? And what I aim to do is provide you with practical guidelines, an operational manual that stacks the card deck in your favor. My sister-in-law says I don't want to be the last guy standing, because that would really suck, being the last guy at a party, but at the same time, I don't want to be the first one to go. So that's what this does, and that's what I'm aiming to do. And there we go. There's your summary for the introduction in chapter 1 of Outlive. And we're going to get into what that means, the strategy behind it in chapter 2, introducing medicine 3.0. See you there.